she knows.
She does. We'll go into the details of that. Harvey mentions to Mike that it could be an indication that she is interested in his career. I think the next big theme of this show is Daniel Hardman's return.
I have so many thoughts and questions about this. We're at the man's funeral, or his wife's funeral. Yeah.
And Lewis says, I hate sycophants. I don't think that's it. I don't think he gets ousted. I think Harvey and Jessica may leave.
Welcome to Suits on Suits. We're your hosts, Quinn and Jared Mayberry, brothers and practicing lawyers. On this show, we cover legal concepts, culture of law, and the plot points brought up on the show Suits. So before we dive into this episode, we've seen this constant tension with Mike almost getting found out time and time again.
Yeah, almost every episode.
Yeah. And so the question that we're going to address later in the episode, but that we first want to put to the audience and put to you all is he worth it? Why does Harvey keep putting his neck out like this?
I mean, he to the point that he's willing to lose his job over it.
Yeah, it's to the, about as extreme as possible. And so, this is something Jared and I have talked about while watching the show. Again, we're going to address it later on in this episode, but at the onset, we want to put the question to you all, and we'll read a few of those comments on a future episode and shoot one of you a $25 gift card for commenting, just as a thank you. Jared, what else are we going to talk about today?
So today we're going to talk about the fight over Mike's future is on. Has Jessica finally figured out his past? That's a big one. Mike's reason for law, what is it? And what are Dram Shop Laws? Daniel Hardman makes an appearance, but don't call it a comeback.
It's a comeback.
Would a name partner come back to their firm after a 5-year hiatus? And finally, how would you actually manage a claim that is threatening to hold up an acquisition like we see in the Swinton merger?
All fun questions to address. And before we get into the substance of those, can you give us a quick recap of this episode?
Yeah, we're talking about season 2, episode 1, titled She Knows, which may give away the answer to the first question.
Does Jessica know about Mike?
Yeah.
Well, title would suggest she knows.
She does. Jessica invites Mike out to dinner. Everyone seems to know what that means, but they all have different interpretations of it. We'll go into the details of that. Jessica then admits to Harvey that she knows that Mike isn't a licensed attorney. Harvey and Jessica spend the rest of the episode negotiating the firing of Mike. We are faced with the big question, is Mike really worth all the trouble?
Yeah.
In the background, we have Daniel Hardman's return and the Swinton merger, which has a few twists and turns. Let's start with the dinner. Jessica asks Mike out to dinner. There's obviously implications here of the managing partner. Harvey mentions to Mike that it could be an indication that she is interested in his career.
Yeah, Harvey mentions the last 5 senior partners at the firm.
Exactly.
Had gone to this same dinner with Jessica whenever they were, I think, first years.
Yeah, and Lewis eventually understands it to be an important dinner. We also know that Harvey isn't aware of it, so he's skeptical that there may be a twist to the dinner. But effectively, Jessica's sussing out Mike. Mm-hmm. And one of the things she brings up is, why are you a lawyer? My question to you is, I feel like that's a question that people often ask in interviews for law. And why is that? Do you need a reason to be a lawyer that's more profound, or some kind of moral anchoring in some alternative reason than it's a job and I want to get paid?
It's a good question. I think it comes up in interviews a lot. I would speculate the reason why it comes up in interviews so much is because these are pretty competitive jobs.
Yeah. And
they have the luxury of picking somebody whose, narrative they like.
But isn't the point of the interview to suss out whether or not someone's qualified for
Well,
the
that
job?
was about to be my next point was, you're basing the decision off of, a lot of soft factors.
Yeah.
Most of which before the interview even starts. So say you have a writing sample, which you could gauge objectively.
Yep.
You have essentially your academic transcript.
And so how have you performed over time?
Yeah. And beyond that, unlike a case interview for consulting or something, or rather any technical interview, it's really tough to do that in a legal setting. And so instead, I think they're just looking for fit.
It still strikes me as odd, because fit's more about, are we going to be able to spend time with each other in a way that is we're going to spend a lot of time together. Are we going to actually get along during that time we spent together?
So maybe it's a lazy question to get at fit, but well, I think it does get at one significant thing.
Yes.
Somebody's passion for the work. And I think for these jobs that can be, in some ways all consuming, think, you're a resident as a doctor, you're working in big law, you're working for some nonprofit with like really long, exhausting hours. There's a desire to understand what's going to motivate people.
To be fair, this was that rationale. Now I'm going to clean it up a little bit. Is the same reason that if I were giving them the benefit of the doubt, the people asking this question, I would say for jobs where they're going to be really hard, you want to know if someone has the ability to work through the really hard things because there's something higher than just the money. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, you're working so many hours, even at a high salary, your hourly rate may be kind of paltry. So I think I get that point. And to me, you almost need another kind of level of reason to get through the sheer pain of it in the early days. My guess is that no one actually would articulate this reason, but as an attorney, either a litigator or a transactional attorney, your whole job is storytelling. So as a litigator, you're building a story around why your client should win. And as a corporate attorney, negotiating is effectively competitive storytelling, right? It's like, why is my reason or rationale or leverage more important than yours? Being able to come up with a compelling story for your reason, whether or not it's true, is an important skill set.
Yeah. And I guess, judged by how credible the receiver of the story thinks it is. And so any good story needs to be grounded in facts and reality, and then becomes emotional persuasion, I guess, at that point. How compelling you can make the story.
If you were an interviewer, would you ask the question?
Yeah, I would.
Interesting. I would not.
I would ask the question. So if I were responsible for hiring 500 people, I wouldn't care. If I were responsible for hiring, let's say, one person to my team, I would care for a couple of different reasons.
Yeah, tell me.
So the first one I already mentioned, ideally they're interested in this for some reason beyond the dollars and cents. It's a job. Like, let's be real. That's going to be the primary reason most people are doing jobs. Some people have the luxury of not needing to work for money, and like,
not me.
More power to them. And I think it's really cool whenever people in those positions go out and do a job that's like mission driven.
Totally.
Ideally, you can have both though. You can do the job for work, but you care about the mission. You're willing to focus on the details that are necessary to really excel to the next level. And oftentimes I don't think pure dollars and cents are good enough motivator for people to, one, stick with it for the long haul, and two, really dive into the weeds in a way where they're going to become exceptional at that practice.
So here's what I would say. If you're Jessica, I get your point, but I think that your point requires a job that has some purpose. The story then has to tie back to whatever job the person's going to take. In this situation, actually, interestingly, Mike brings up, and we're going to talk about this in more detail shortly, a situation where his parents were, I think, killed in a car accident or some kind of accident. And
sounds like a car accident where the person was overserved.
But he's talking about that, and then he's representing large corporations and wealthy people. Like, to me, the story doesn't, it may be a story of why he became a lawyer, but then it doesn't, it's like, why would he work for that firm then?
Yeah, which is a great question. I think the way he told the story to Jessica, there was this strong emphasis on not wanting to feel helpless and seeing the law as a tool to navigate the world, which I think is absolutely accurate. Yes. So regardless of what side of the V you're on, you are able to wield that, that knowledge and the power that flows from that knowledge of how the world works, basically. Like I
agree with that. I get that point. That one didn't scream as loud and clear to me as, I guess, clearly it did to you, but I do think that's more compelling than I think alternatively. So you would do it.
I'm so moved by the power of law I would like to use it to suppress people who are in a similar situation.
Exactly. Although you see him constantly siding with whoever the underdog
100%.
is. Yeah.
That's clearly in his heart.
Yeah, I don't think I would ask it because I kind of think it is a contrived question, and I think it tends to force people to come up with stories that most of the time aren't that compelling. It's kind of like, why do you want to go to this university? And you're like,
it's a great university. I want to go to like a good school.
If you want a real answer, it's pretty short and sweet. Now, if you want some compelling answer that's going to move the needle, I'm going to have to come up with something that's like either so tenuous so it sounds stupid, or it's going to be a lie.
Yeah.
Like, I would like to hear people's motives for why they do things, and getting to know that for a potential new employees, I think is helpful in making the decision. But I just don't think that it needs to be narrowly focused on why you chose the law.
That's a fair point. And I think oftentimes the answers to these types of questions are contrived.
Yeah.
I wouldn't hold it against somebody if they were pretty candid about it and said, came from this background and finding a stable job was really important to me. And this seems like an avenue to a stable job if I really work hard and commit myself to it.
Remember this whenever you apply to a job at Mayberry Law.
Yeah, just take the words right out of my mouth.
So with that, we do, one of the things we talk about, or one of the things that Mike brings up, is this concept where his parents were killed in an accident that was associated with someone being overserved at a bar, restaurant, tavern, whatever it is. Can you tell us what that series of law, like, and it sounds like his family missed it. They didn't realize that there was a claim there. That to me seems a little disingenuous, because they probably knew at least that the driver was liable, correct?
You would think so.
Yeah.
Them knowing that the driver was liable doesn't necessarily mean that they would know that the bar or restaurant that served them was liable, though.
Can you give us a brief understanding of what Dram Shop is today? Dram Shop Laws.
Yeah, high level, it's just a law that creates liability for a bar or restaurant that overserves somebody.
So now we know through Dram Shop Laws that the bar may have some liability, but is the individual who, was driving the car or who threw the punch, are they still liable?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no question about that one. So they will still be liable, assuming, they would have otherwise been liable without the alcohol involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if they, crossed the center line in the road, for example, or their reaction time was reduced because they were intoxicated, they're absolutely going to be liable.
Yeah. And what do you think the kind of motive or public policy behind this structure is?
Yeah, just to try and ensure that people aren't overserved, and the individual who goes out in the world and commits this tort or gets into this accident is oftentimes not going to be able to pay for it. And so you're trying to shift some of the responsibility towards the bar or the restaurant that also contributed to creating this situation.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think you're right in terms of, because we're talking about civil liability, we're talking about damages, we're talking about monetary damages. I also think there's a deterrent factor, which is like the person the bar or restaurant is on notice that they may have monetary damages associated with overserving. So now you have a bigger tent of people who are trying to prevent the overconsumption of alcohol, at least in public spaces, right?
Yeah, and so I guess I was going to work backwards to that, but I think that's exactly right. That's the policy that underpins the reason for having this liability hook on the bars or restaurants.
Yeah, at least that's the idea, right? Like, that's what they're trying to do. And I think that's why you see like Mothers Against Drunk Driving being advocates of Dram Shop Laws. And I think it works, because have you ever worked in a bar or restaurant?
No.
Yeah. So I worked...
Well, that's not true, but not a place that served alcohol. I worked at a coffee shop.
Yeah, so I worked at a restaurant where we served alcohol, and they have trainings on this. And the manager is constantly vigilant about it. Like, sure, we were all a bunch of like silly 20-year-olds, like not paying attention to it, and frankly probably over consuming at home, with our friends. But
with or without the bar, we found a way. Yeah.
But so I don't think I at the time was like super vigilant about it, but I remember multiple times where a manager would come to someone who, like the bartender, and would say, "Hey, that person seems too drunk. How many have they had? We can't serve more than X." The liability was enough of a punishment to deter them from allowing it to happen on their watch.
I think that's exactly what they were going for, and policy makes a lot of sense to me. I get why people might take issue with this to the extent that the individual should be primarily bearing the brunt of the responsibility, but this doesn't let them off the hook at all.
It doesn't.
All it does is allows some relief for the victim if there is one, and to your point, hopefully creates more situations where there are less victims.
Yeah, exactly. There's some paternalism there. There's some desire for making someone who actually has the ability to pay be on the hook for it potentially. But I think those all are in service of this deterrent factor. One of the things that I thought was interesting as I was kind of going through the history of Dram Shop Laws, what do you know about the history of them?
Not much. Adventure a guess they started during Prohibition, but that's the extent of what I know.
Yeah, so it's funny. Really quickly, in colonial times, it was actually illegal to restrict someone's drinking. So like a bar couldn't tell someone to stop.
We just start chanting "Make America Great Again."
Exactly. It's like this
is what we're trying to.
It was illegal to not overserve someone if they requested it, and so there was
Wild West was a hell of a place.
I know. It was in the 19th century that they started doing these what they called the initial Dram Shop Laws, where a bar had the ability to cut someone off. Yeah. That was the first of it. And that was part of the temperance movement, and the temperance movement ended in Prohibition, and quickly was overturned via the 21st Amendment. But it wasn't until the 1960s, 70s that they started creating modern Dram Shop Laws that were about the real accidents associated with over serving. So like the car accidents, the fights, etc. That happened. And I think MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, had a big hand in that.
That makes perfect sense. And I'd be surprised if MAD wasn't involved in this movement. Something that I found out a few years ago was MAD was also involved in getting the drinking age raised to 21 from 18. And they did that by leveraging the legislature to tie federal funding for highways to the drinking age. Yeah. So if a state had a drinking age below 21, they essentially wouldn't receive federal funding for their highway projects.
Yeah, and as I understand it, the reason behind that shift was actually they had crunched the data and had shown that there are more fatal car accidents related to, I don't remember if it was more fatal car accidents generally or more fatal car accidents associated with alcohol. I think both, in states where the drinking age was lower than 21. So they had a logical argument backing them up.
I was about to sarcastically say thanks a lot, MAD, but they've done great work.
Yeah, well, and I think it makes sense. It's hard to argue against. It's not like they're being puritanical about it.
Yeah, completely agree. Let's talk about Mike getting caught now, though.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see it coming with the dinner and how Jessica initially started the conversation with Harvey. It sounded like she had bought it hook, line, and sinker. She eventually admits to Harvey in that same conversation that she knows. How did she find out?
Yeah, so he had the fake transcript or the fake record at Harvard. There's no academic record of him at an undergraduate institution.
Yeah, so that's obviously a red flag. I'm a little shocked that that's the first she's heard of some, detail that has fallen short on Mike. What are some others? Like, I can think of a few, but what are some others that you think she should have caught? Or
there were so many red flags throughout the season, but I don't know how many Jessica would have directly witnessed. So, whenever he's at the Harvard club, there are a few red flags, but I don't think Jessica was really there for that. I don't know. What comes up for you?
Yeah, so for me is if he hadn't gone to Harvard, are we to believe that he's taken the bar and is technically licensed in New York State?
It's a question we've asked before. I don't know what the answer is, but it feels like no.
Yeah. So for me, it's like,
if that's the case, though, then it just blows the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think maybe we are to believe that, because otherwise it starts to get really ludicrous. It's just a Google search.
With the license, it just complicates things, and it's kind of hard to get to Jessica feeling so summarily certain that he doesn't have the ability to practice because he didn't go to college. He's older. Records could be bad. There are a million reasons why it doesn't make a lot of sense. But it does bring up the question, which we kind of get bashed on the head with over the rest of the episode is Mike worth it? Because Harvey's constantly, like, he takes it to the brink with Jessica here. He's willing to quit, willing to get fired by Jessica to save Mike's job.
Here's a boring answer. No, he's not worth it.
He's not worth it.
Not even close. But there's clearly a bond between Mike and Harvey, and this isn't just a logical decision anymore. He cares about Mike, and we respect Harvey, or at least I do, for going to bat for the small handful of people he cares about.
I think part of it is he's trying to gain future loyalty. So it's like, if I go to bat for you to this degree, how could you ever cut against me? Although Mike continues to be a little freaking brat.
I was going to say, Mike cuts against him at every turn.
I know.
That could be the case, but I wonder if the reality isn't simply he realizes he's in this too now. He's implicated in this. Yeah. He obviously cares about Mike. There's some self-preservation happening. Because if he is doing this for future loyalty, I think Mike has shown to him time and time again that he already deeply cares about Harvey, but he's also, there's virtually nothing Harvey can do, including risking his own job, where Mike will become more or less loyal, it seems.
So with that, I think you have kind of two options. One is you agree with Quinn and you think there's a motive that is, or you think that Harvey's motive is his loyalty to the people that he's close to. He's got a small circle, he's loyal to them. And there's some level of self-preservation. He's trying to preserve himself for, because now he feels like he's in it with him. I think you could, the alternative, option two is, which is where I sit, is current loyalty, but also future fealty. And I think some percentage of his decision, let's call it 30%, is that future fealty reason. So we've given you two kind of options or things we think it could be. Love to hear if you agree with either of ours, or if you have a third or fourth or fifth option. Yeah.
And primarily we'd love to hear why Jared's wrong about this. It just doesn't make much sense.
Yeah. I think just, print up the t-shirts, get the team Jared, team Quinn going. Let's
Jared's wrong. Jared's wrong.
I think the next big theme of this show is Daniel Hardman's return.
I have so many thoughts and questions about this. First, do you think it's realistic?
So I think the answer is no. The funny thing is, like, very likely his name could be on the firm and he owns 0% of it by the time he's left. That's most commonly the way these law firms are structured. He has zero ownership after he retires and steps away from the firm. So if he's going to come back, it would have to be at Jessica and the senior partner's behest. And
he seems to have a lot of sway with the partnership.
Well, we don't know enough the partners other than Lewis, who's junior partner, who has no say. So I'd be curious. They all seem to like him whenever he's in that room with him, but
that's kind of everything I'm basing it off.
Yeah, fair, but I don't know who's the senior partner, who's not.
Yeah.
And with Jessica being the managing partner of the head of the firm, it's hard to imagine that she doesn't have her finger on the pulse on what the senior partner's like.
Yeah, and if she didn't, why is she the managing partner at some point? So what do you think he did to piss off Jessica and Harvey initially?
Yeah, it's hard to say. My guess is it's like death by a million paper cuts. He seems to be like a total pain in the ass.
I just wonder how much of it was the fact that he was borrowing clients' funds, because that's an enormous deal.
Good point. I totally blanked on that.
Huge scandal. So it's obviously a big part of it, but is that the culmination of a feud? Had they been, feuding beforehand? Were they just like, this is a bright line, you can't cross that?
Well, the irony there is, like, why isn't that the leverage that they used against him? Why is it some infidelity?
Because Jessica was worried about tarnishing the firm's name. Harvey wanted to out him for borrowing the funds.
So is it the idea that she balked at that? She
just killed the idea.
Well, I guess she wouldn't have had to out him. I mean, she didn't out the infidelity. She just threatened it. I guess maybe he doesn't believe the threat.
I think that's the idea, is either he doesn't believe the threat, or she's not even willing to get into the arena. She's not even willing to risk threatening it.
Yeah. I don't see how he survives that. Even if he comes back and airs his grievance, the infidelity, sure, air the grievance. I don't know how you survive having, even if you pay it all back, taking money from client escrow funds.
Yeah. And I think they try and kind of polish over this, saying that happened a long time ago and every cent was returned. And no harm, no foul. That was in the past. I'm totally with you. It's such a huge scandal. You don't just come back from that after publicly exposing yourself about it.
Totally agree. Are we to believe that Daniel Hardman's back for good?
It seems like it. What do you mean by back for good? I think we've got him back for a season. I think that the trajectory beyond that.
And what do you think that culminates in?
Couldn't even begin to imagine. It's going to be some ouster planned by Harvey, but the specifics, I haven't thought about it. That's a good question.
I don't think that's it. I don't think he gets ousted. I think Harvey and Jessica may leave.
This brings up a huge pivot here.
Yeah.
This brings up a question I've been having in the show. So there's so much will they, won't they? And we see these rise and falls. We're on season 2, episode 1. I'm embarrassed to admit, I don't even know how many episodes or how many seasons there are. We're talking about like roughly 150 episodes.
Yeah.
We're on, I think, episode 13 now.
Yeah.
How are they able to maintain this will they, won't they between, Mike being exposed more broadly, Harvey and Lewis, Mike and Rachel? There's so much tension that you could cut a lot of these, with a knife. And how are they going to maintain that rise and fall and that constant tension over the span of another, almost 150 episodes? Yes. Do you think that we delve into different universes where they start their own firm?
I think it has to. I think there's plenty of twists and turns in that respect. Like, I think
people falling in and out of love.
Yeah, I think there's that. I'm a little shocked. I kind of felt like we'd mostly resolved Mike. I will admit, if we continue to talk about Mike in season 3, like, will he get outed or not? And 4 and 5, I'm going to get kind of bored of it because I feel like
at that point we'll stop talking about whether or not the show does.
Yeah, I agree, because I just don't think it's that interesting anymore, because we're all to believe he's going to be there for however many seasons there are. So it kind of loses its muster. Now, I think I would think that even if the show weren't over, because he's the main character, but it gets kind of boring. I do think maybe this is the kind of light in disinfectant, where it's like Jessica now knows, Harvey knows, Jessica knows, Mike knows, and Mike knows that they know. So we're kind of like moving on from this, is my hope. Because I don't think an external person's probably going to find out. But I don't
Fast forward 3 episodes now, Daniel Hardman is using it as leverage. We have another season of this tension.
Well, let's hope not.
So one question I had related to this topic was, we see Harvey go and threaten Hardman.
Yep.
Hardman's pretending like he's not coming back. Harvey threatens him, and he does come back.
Yeah, he's become the Zen master.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think he would have come back but for the threats?
Man, I don't know. I could believe either story, to be honest. And I think that was, if I were a betting man, I would guess his plan was always to come back. And I'm believing that because that's what Jessica and Harvey believe, and that's what they portray to us. So that's what I have to believe. But I could totally see someone saying, like, you're going to threaten me? I'm coming for you.
Yeah, these are people with enormous egos here.
That's the one thing I'll say that is very well captured in the show.
Yeah, and I wonder if he didn't kind of screw himself trying to get out ahead of it so aggressively.
Yeah.
I don't think that a wait and see approach is typically the right answer, but there is some middle ground between just being totally passive and trying to strangle this thing right out of the gate.
One of the things, talking about the threat, one of the things that happened in this episode that made me realize, like, Harvey is not James Bond, he is Batman, was he opened, Daniel Hardman's daughter opens the door. She's clearly like
distraught.
Distraught and an attractive woman.
Yeah.
And we don't see Harvey make a move at all. If that were James Bond, his in would have been to figure out a way to seduce the woman.
The daughter?
Yes.
This woman might have been 17 years old.
No. She's not 17. He's a senior partner. She's in her 20s.
She's in her 20s? I guess she's at college, yeah. Still, is James Bond... God, what a creep.
That's what you realize.
Yeah, like,
once you rewatch James Bond, you're kind of like, oh, he's not a good dude. Not for the killings. For the sexual conquest.
The womanizing. Tough.
Yeah.
Well, backpedaling a little bit here as we need to.
Yes. Safer ground.
Whenever we're trying to figure out whether or not Hardman's going back, or like it was his plan all along to come back.
Yeah.
That clearly went over Lewis's head. So they're at the funeral,
Yes.
and he's talking to this associate, and he's, just bashing Hardman as the slave driver.
Yes.
And he's like,
No concession, no gratitude. Toward
couldn't
him.
spare a complimentary word here or there, a crumb of a compliment.
Yeah.
The associate's the foil who's like, we're at the man's funeral,
I know.
or his wife's
Lewis'
funeral. Yeah.
And Lewis says, I hate sycophants.
Exactly. He's like, and then immediately we see this about face whenever it clicks for Lewis that, he might be coming back.
Yeah.
Because the associate directly points it out.
Yeah, that's how bad Lewis is at the politics of this business. He needed the associate to point out the fact that this guy.
And then he immediately demands the pink ribbon after figuring out why he's wearing it.
And says, you cannot get in line.
Well, that line's flowing pretty quickly after all.
Yeah, but not you.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of the show to date is Lewis's driving force in the world is towards power. And whenever he's clueless over where the power center is, it's always fun to see those competing tensions of like having no idea where to direct his, unwavering loyalty.
Agreed. He's a total mercenary. The thing I would say that's interesting is you think the driving force is power. That's probably what I think it is too. It's definitely not money, which I'm a little shocked by.
Well, some form of climbing. I don't know if it's power or success,
Social
or
prestige.
Yeah.
A combination of those things, to be honest.
But whatever.
Soft things.
Yeah, soft things, though. It's like status.
The status, yeah.
Okay, so let's move on from our conversation about Hardman returning to the merger. It's kind of our B plot in this episode.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the ex-employees of the selling company has a claim against her company,
Yeah.
her old company, and it's become a bit of a sticking point in this merger that Mike is now responsible for on behalf of Harvey. Can you tell us a little bit about this claim and why it might hold up a merger?
Yeah, so I mean, to take a step back, I think actually claims like this happen all the time. Sometimes they're motivated by, it was a claim that was always going to be there regardless of this potential acquisition, and it just, ordinary course companies get sued, or, shame on Mike, but when people find out that there are acquisitions happening, they think it's a moment of leverage for them if they have a claim, or maybe they think that the buying company has deeper pockets, so it has more money or deeper pockets, so they go after the company, the selling company at that moment in time. But either way, these happen all the time, and to think that you're going to only sell companies when there's no litigation outstanding is kind of absurd. Right.
Can you talk to us about how you account for it? Appreciating that there's always going to be this litigation if it's a company of a certain size, almost without exception. How do we address it?
Yeah, exactly. So I think the first one is, maybe you do try to close it out. You try to close out as many as you can beforehand, like they're doing here, but it wouldn't hold it up. What you would do instead, if you had some certainty around what the liability is, like you're far enough down the litigation path or the negotiation conversations, you may just adjust the purchase price for that liability amount. Now, if you're the selling company, that's great because you have certainty around what's changing, although your price is going down. But if you're the buyer, again, you may like it because you have certainty, but what if the settlement amount is greater than that? What if you ultimately have to resolve it for more? So one of the main ways that people do this is they deal with it through indemnification. And most private sellers will have some form of indemnification, that's covered by either an escrow, so reserving money back to cover the indemnification claims, or some pool of money, or it'll be some, the stockholders themselves that have to pony up if there's a claim that goes against the indemnification. But the indemnification is saying, we, the selling stockholders, or we, the selling company, are going to be responsible for any economic claims or damages that occur due to this litany of things that we're indemnifying against.
Okay, so we covered a lot of ground there, but at its core, we're dealing with the seller covering the damages from these legal claims.
Yeah.
How is that negotiated? How does that either mechanically play out, or, is that baked into the price? How do we think about this?
Yeah, totally. So indemnification provisions can be as bespoke and specialized and unique as you can possibly imagine. But what I would think about here, in Mike's situation, we know what the claim is, right? And so I think what you may do is have a specific indemnification written into the merger agreement that says the sellers will cover all damages associated with this claim. Now, this is a point of leverage. If the buyer doesn't have the leverage to push this onto the seller, then the seller may argue for some limitation on how much they have
up to $50,000.
Yes.
Or, yeah.
Something like that, $50,000, some percentage of the sale price. All of those things are on the table. But I think, most fair here would be that they would cover the damages associated with this known claim. If I'm the buyer, I'm going to tell someone to do that.
So is it fair to say that, like virtually all contract negotiation, we're really dealing with risk mitigation here, and it comes down to leverage. So depending on who has more leverage, they can force more risk onto the other party, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point. And oftentimes whenever buyers paying cash to the stockholders, they're going to say, we have cash. That's what everyone wants. We're going to impose you're going to take all the liability. We have allocated this much cash to this deal. And if it goes more than that because of some claim that we didn't know about or that we knew about and we didn't cover, that screws our balance sheet and the CFO is going to be pissed.
So why would the companies be so inclined to try and close out this litigation before closing the deal, whenever they're able to indemnify and shift the risk in this way? Does it just create more certainty?
I think it's mostly about certainty. But in getting that certainty, you're giving up some leverage because it's clear you're both indicating and you both spent a lot of money trying to get this merger done. And if I'm a claimant, I'm saying, if I have the ability to hold up this deal while people are spending millions of dollars on acquisition fees, they're going to give me a lot more money. So I think you may lose some leverage with the claimant if you're going this path.
If you're going the path of indemnification or trying to close it out?
If you're closing it out beforehand.
And so you're trading, certainty for leverage, basically.
100%.
You either get more leverage and less certainty with the indemnification agreement, or you get more certainty and less leverage closing out any claims before cementing the M&A deal. Okay, so knowing that, how would you manage this claim as the buyer?
Yeah, so I think probably what I would do is I would set aside some kind of pool of funds that come out of the purchase price, and I would put a special indemnity in place. I would tell the seller that they were covering all expenses related to paying off the claim, including attorney's fees or any other kind of consulting fees required. And you'd have the pool of money to make sure that you were going to be able to recover against the sellers.
And is a special indemnity just an indemnity against one specific claim, or?
Yeah, exactly. So in this case, it would be a special indemnity against this exact claim that we know about, or any derivative claims associated with the claim that we're aware of. There will be a general indemnity that if it's a private sale merger, it's almost certain that there will be indemnity against a broader swath of claims that are coming. And this would probably be caught up in it, but that has limitations, most likely. That has dollar limitations that I don't think, if you know there's a claim outstanding, you want the known claim to be subject to.
Okay, so there's going to also likely be a general indemnity. We're getting out of the world of this specific claim,
yeah.
But I mean, tell us a little bit about how that general indemnity might be structured during an M&A.
Yeah, so there's some negotiation around what claims the general indemnity covers, and that's part of the negotiation. But as the buyer, you're trying to make it as broad as possible. As the seller, you want to carve it back to some degree to things that are reasonable. But setting that kind of what it's covered aside with the idea that it's something broad, it's probably going to be about 10, 15, 20%, maybe even 30% of the overall deal price. So it's a pretty big size chunk of what the deal proceeds are. And it's probably held back, or there's probably going to be an escrow, so a pool of funds that's held back that's similarly sized for 12, 18, 24 months.
So after, closing, let's say a $10 billion deal, they might be holding back, $3 billion.
They could be, that gets paid out in 12 months.
As opposed to that being covered by an insurance policy. They're actually holding that in cash, potentially.
So there are now rep and warranty insurance policies. I don't want to get into the details of those.
Fair, but
people pay some premium, some percentage of whatever the coverage is, and they get covered for any kind of claim that pops up down the road. But traditionally, they held back 10% of the deal.
Enormous amount of cash in the bank.
And it gets paid off in 12, 18, 24 months.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that pretty well covers what we wanted to cover on today's episode. As usual, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and let us know what you want to see more of.
Team Jared.
We'll see you next week.